Today's episode is sponsored by Vitality Health RX Supplements. Whether you're an athlete, a busy professional, or just someone looking to prioritize health, Vitality Health RX has what you need. With premium ingredients and rigorous quality control, their supplements support your body's natural functions. Visit shopvrx.com and use code FEELGREAT15 for 15% off your first order. Thanks to Vitality Health RX for sponsoring this episode. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Feel Better, Feel Great podcast episode, Toxic Burden Overwhelm in Menopause. I am Dr. Andrea McSwain. Before we delve into today's podcast, I want to remind you that I am a medical professional, but the information shared here is intended for education purposes only. It is not a substitute for personalized medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please consult with your healthcare provider for guidance for your specific health needs. Now let's embark on this health education journey together. This topic is going to be a little overwhelming, and I'm going to talk to you about it because it's very important. I'm seeing it in my clinic, and I want to address it today. It is going to be a little bit more of a concept, but what I think is going to happen is you're really going to resonate with the fact that this could be you. And if that's the case, and I feel like I'm doing my job as a podcaster, as a doctor, as someone providing education, it's kind of just blowing this idea open for you to think about. Because what I'm finding now is the future of medicine is acknowledging that menopause exists, and then it's exacerbating our fears of menopause. It's making us think that it's going to be horrible, or maybe it is horrible, or that it's supposed to be horrible, or that it's supposed to start who knows when, early 40s, late 30s, all these ideas on perimenopause. And what I have to say is if you're symptomatic in this difficult transition time of life, we need to address some symptoms, but we also need to recognize that that means your body is under additional stress during this transition time, and we need to understand why your body is having this response. Sounds a little crazy, maybe. All right, I'll take it, because that's exactly what we need to be talking about, is what is going on, where are the problems, and how do we actually address them from a root cause perspective. If people are symptomatic, they have symptoms. Why do they have symptoms? It's not just because they're in a stage of life. These things have to be addressed, and we have to look at some of the underlying things that are affecting us, which really boils down to often nutrition deficiencies, not getting enough stuff out of our body for elimination. We have to look at lifestyle pillars, of course. Those are always fundamental. Definitely great places to start in thinking about your body. So looking at lifestyle medicine related to menopause, the research shows that hot flashes are more related to a poor night's sleep than anything else. So making sure you have a good quality sleep will definitely reduce symptoms of hot flashes. What we find sometimes in my clinic, if people are struggling with hot flashes that are so severe, they're soaking wet as if they have an infection or an overwhelming event happening inside their body, that their immune system is aggravated and needs to get this out. So again, some difficult concepts today, and I want to break them down into some areas so we can first understand this kind of body susceptibility in the transition of menopause. When we look at that, as well as what are some environmental factors that you didn't create, but they exist in your life and they have implications in your body. And then also looking at, maybe some conjoined symptomatology related to menopause and toxic burden, and then understanding a little bit more about that, and then getting again to putting it all together. So looking at understanding your body susceptibility in menopause. This is a time that happens for females, understanding the body susceptibility in the transition of menopause. So menopause is definitely a time where the body is leaving the reproductive period for women. So women have a reproductive phase in their lives, And in the beginning of that time and towards the end of that time, there is a transition period, which makes the flow a little more unstable. The timing, the duration, all those things are affected as people are either entering or leaving the reproductive phase of their bodies, of their lives. And so that is the leaving part is menopause, right? So it means that the hormones are reducing but not stopping their production. So the hormones are reducing the amount of the hormone to make it so that the womb cannot implant an egg and have reproduction. However, you still have hormones. Women in menopause and thereafter have hormones. And a little insight into menopause and how people transition is often related to the feminization of their characteristics, of their facial features and their body. So maintaining that level of hormone can happen differently in different people. And then looking at the timing of menopause, on average is about age 52 to 53. So if you are 38 and someone is saying, well, that's just menopause, that's not the case. There might be some decline in some reproductive hormones, but there is at that age, but it is definitely not in going into menopause. I mean, I'm really adamant about saying that. I feel like that is a label. It's a diagnosis without definition or resolution attempts. It's just giving something diagnose and adios, like, oh, that's perimenopause. It's like, come on, let's do better than that as doctors and healthcare providers. So then again, looking at menopause and how it can relate to the rest of the body. So menopause happens when we have an estrogen decline, okay? And that estrogen decline affects more than our egg quality and our egg release, and it affects more than our menstrual flow. It also affects our bone density and our bone turnover, and that also affects our heart and also affects our nutrition needs. And that's something we're going to address when we combine this idea of menopause with toxic burden. Okay, but I want to go a little bit now into the toxic burden aspect and look at this idea of where did these toxins come from? I understand that people discuss the idea of toxins in our bodies as completely undocumented science. And I think that's very interesting because it's actually 2 10-year longitudinal studies showing the significant implications of toxic metals on cardiovascular disease in the type 2 diabetes population and the effects of actually helping to facilitate the removal of those toxic metals and then getting significant clinical and statistical improvement in that person's biomarkers, their quality of life, and their disease reversal. These trials are called the TAC trial and the TAC2 trial. Again, each of those is 10 years long. When the TAC trial was done, it had significant findings, but it kind of went against the normal medical convention idea, and it actually was required to be repeated by the FDA, and that became the TAC2 trial. Now, we actually have Medicare covering unprovoked toxic burden chelation. So I just want to give you a little bit of medical information as to the validity of discussing toxic metals in our bodies and how toxic metals are documented in very long studies to provide us with information on both cardiovascular health, which is a massive implication in our society, as well as diabetes type 2. Again, very significant in our society and throughout the world. Okay, so how did we get these toxic metals from our environment into our body? Well, from overwhelm. Well, we can leave it as simple as that, from the water, from the air, from pesticides that people don't understand, that a lot of how we live now in understanding how these pesticides affect us came from an overwhelm, using these in the late 1800s, living in Michigan. There is definitely a conversation about the watershed and the water toxicity from having a lot of industry in this area. So those are very important. And then I want to think too about, the Aaron Brockovich story. So this definitely illustrates how communities can be affected by environmental toxins. So the Aaron Brockovich story can illustrate how communities are affected by environmental toxins. She discusses a town in southern Arizona, and I actually did a 30-day rotation in medical school near this Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And so that was interesting because here I was actually practicing internal medicine and cardiovascular medicine as a medical student in the Fort Huachuca area. And that was very insightful because I had already seen the Aaron Brockovich movie. I had already understood a little bit more of that idea of what was happening in this community and how it was affecting people with their health, especially when you get into the ideas of very early onset cancer. And that was one of the main messages in the Aaron Brockovich story movie, was this kind of unknown reason, again, unknown reason or not widely known reason, or, this idea of unconventional reason, if you will, this idea of environmental toxins and how they get stored in our body and how they then can create problems in our body, symptoms in our body, and then affect us when we have big changes, like transitions in different parts of our progression through life. Another anecdote in this situation is I did about 4,000 home visits with Medicare patients as one of my professional roles as a doctor in the Michigan area. And I soon started finding this common story of people telling me when they grew up in farms and in communities, so that they would, as young children, chase the DEET truck. So DEET is a pesticide, and it would spray out of the truck in the back, and it would go in through the fields and roads and things. And whoever passed out last was the winner. So imagine a truck spraying out pesticides, and there's about 8 young children running behind it, getting sprayed, and whoever passes out last is the winner. Okay, so that wasn't one time that I heard that story. Actually, I heard it so many times. I would ask people, when you were little, did you follow the DEET truck? And they would say yes, and some would say no, but this was very, very common before people understood that they were actually spraying themselves in high doses of pesticides. And that was a very common occurrence. The other thing is looking at days gone by where sewage plants and other facilities were open to the environment, and people weren't understanding quite the implications. So we have heard stories where, living next to a sewage plant unopened, and then also going to school right next door to that. And then the amount of overwhelm of the body. And then anecdotally, there are definitely some implications for the health conditions of neighbors in that community. So the other thing is working in Flint for a little bit and seeing how that watershed and that toxic load has been implicated in that community. So these are just some real world impact on environmental toxins on health. I think that it's root cause for people. Health implications for toxic metals can really mean, in a nutshell, that people are on this hamster wheel of rehabilitation metabolically, which means they just can't get over this hump of having nutrition deficiencies like vitamin D. They maintain an elevated cholesterol. Some of their organ functions are showing problems like decreased kidney function with GFR, or glomerular filtration rate, or liver enzymes are elevating. The other thing that people look to is another biomarker that is specific for neuroplaque formation and is cited in Alzheimer's, and this is called homocysteine. Homocysteine is an example of how toxins can manifest in the body due to toxic metals or inability to eliminate different waste in the body. So again, toxic metals are a little bit of a contentious subject, and I would love for you to leave comments. I just want you first to recognize that if you are going to understand toxic burden, I think one of the main things to look at is a summary of the TAC trial and the TAC2 trial, and you will find those in the notes on this podcast. Because what they are really saying is we've been looking at toxic metals impact for 2 different studies that were each 10 years long. And I think it's very significant background information to having this conversation. The other thing is looking at the overwhelm that happens in the body when the toxins aren't moved through. So I do believe that the body has a natural capacity to remove waste, right? Where we have organs that are focused on elimination, and we also have support to those organs. So those organs that help with elimination, right? So the colon, the bladder, skin, the lungs, organs that support that elimination process is the liver. Systems that support that is obviously our circulation system, but our lymphatic system more specifically. This really helps with waste removal. But when these are compromised, then we start storing toxins at the organ, tissue, and cellular level. And these symptoms of toxic burden can be found in many different areas of the body. So neurologically, this can be indicated in any number of vague symptoms, but they can be headaches, dizziness, numbness, memory problems, brain fog. There's a lot of gastrointestinal issues, abdominal pain, diarrhea or constipation, bloating, nausea, respiratory symptoms, a lot of chest tightness that can also be perceived as anxiety or overwhelm. Obviously skin exposures, because skin is an organ of elimination. And then looking at achiness in our musculoskeletal system, as muscles and bones can actually store different toxins. The bone can be particularly susceptible to storing toxins, particularly lead. And of course, the cardiovascular, again, TAC1 and TAC2 trials, looking at heavy metals and their contribution to cardiovascular problems, such as high blood pressure, irregular heartbeats, and increased risk of heart disease. The liver and the kidneys as well, there's a support organs for detoxification and elimination, and they can indicate decline. And we can measure those with biomarkers. And then, of course, psychological well-being. So looking at the physical symptoms of heavy metal overwhelm is one thing, but also recognizing that there are very much a tremendous amount of implications for looking at mood swings, irritability, anxiety, depression, cognitive disturbances. People can be easily agitated. They can be reactive even to their loved ones. So those toxic metal elements or heavy metal burden can really also be some health symptoms found in menopause. And this is really important to consider. What has your diagnosis been? Have the root cause elements been addressed? What can you do to actually recognize that there might be something else going on than just getting older and going through menopause? So these toxic metals can really play into the burden and overwhelm that's happening as the body goes through this challenging transition time in life. So there's a lot of stress that happens in the changes that our bodies go through. And as females, we can recognize that. Obviously, going into the reproductive period, if you've had childbearing, those events throughout the body, there's a lot of changes that can happen in the body, and they can take their own toll. We want to make sure that as you move into menopause, And really, that's like the halfway mark. Remember, healthy at 100. So if you're moving into menopause at about 52 and you're starting to really be symptomatic, it's taking over your life, it's confusing you, it's disturbing your relationships, it's altering your health, and then you're looking at symptom abatement through different medications. And I see a new one regularly on the market. I also see people who are coming onto the media, they're coming into our news feeds, and they're giving information like, oh, you can be, menopause can destroy you, or menopause is awful, or it's just because you're in menopause. And it's like, it's not just because you're in menopause, right? Transitioning into life, yes, there are stresses during transition periods, but it's very important to recognize that that is not this high level of symptomatology. We need to get into how to actually address these symptoms without a diagnose and adios mindset, or saying we're going to give you this antidepressant for this hot flash, or this antidepressant because you're being reactive, or this monoclonal antibody because you're sweating, or this It's like the body has a lot of ways to look at root cause treatments, and that's what we want to address. So if you want to find out more about ways to evaluate toxic metals, ways to understand toxic metals in menopause, then please ask questions, because again, I know that this is an unusual combination, right? I also know that people are talking about toxic metals or heavy metal burden, and they're talking without providing evidence. They're talking without clinically substantiating what they're saying. And why are they doing that? I just don't understand. In my clinic, I see people going through a transition of menopause, sometimes very easily, okay? Because they're understanding how to mitigate those stresses. And I see people who are having those struggles, and then we have to work on, yes, the symptoms, but the root cause, okay? Because remember, 52 is only the halfway point to be healthy at 100. 52 is the age where most women transition in menopause as the normal part of their bodies, just making changes and no longer having the reproductive capability. That does not mean we turn into just unpleasant lives. So recognize that if your life is trending that way, you can do something about it. And we're here to help. But I definitely want your feedback, because we want to make sure you're getting the information that you need. We're supporting you in your questions, that you're providing comments that are seeking to understand and seeking to learn more information. Thank you for listening to this journey as we combine these two topics that I know a lot of people are maybe dancing around, and we just dove right into. Thank you.